Emily carefully stirred a pot of homemade soup, the steam rising gently, filling the kitchen with comforting aromas. She loved these quiet moments at home, especially as she prepared dinner for her husband, Oliver. They'd been married for 8 years, and though the early days had been filled with laughter and plans, lately, an invisible wall seemed to be growing between them. She hoped tonight's meal might spark a warm conversation, something to remind them of the closeness they used to share. But in the back of her mind, Emily sensed it wouldn't be that simple. When Oliver walked in, his face looked tense and preoccupied. As they sat down, she asked him softly, "How was work?" His answer was brief and distracted, and he barely looked up from his phone. She tried to bring up small, happy memories, hoping to steer the conversation back to when things felt easier. But as her words filled the silence, Oliver's responses were short, almost dismissive. Emily couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something fundamental had changed in him, and that her words were no longer reaching him. As the evening went on, her attempts to connect were met with indifference, as if he barely noticed her presence. Emily felt the loneliness sink deeper, and a sense of inadequacy crept in. Was she no longer enough for him? She tried to remember when this distance had started, but the memory felt foggy, clouded by so many small instances of coldness that she'd ignored, hoping they were temporary. After dinner, Oliver excused himself to his study, leaving Emily alone to clear the dishes. She moved slowly, feeling the weight of her emotions with each step. She glanced at their wedding photo on the wall, a reminder of a love that felt like a distant memory. Standing there, she whispered softly, "What happened to us?" But the only response was the soft hum of the refrigerator, a lonely sound echoing in the empty kitchen. She was afraid to confront him directly, afraid of what he might say. Deep down, she clung to the hope that this was just a phase, that Oliver was stressed and would eventually return to being the loving, attentive man she once knew. But the reality was that the loving man she'd married was slipping further away each day, and she was left in a quiet house, surrounded by memories that were fading. In the early years of their marriage, Oliver had been a supportive partner, warm and encouraging. Emily remembered how he used to cherish her quirks, how he would smile at her small, random acts of kindness. He had once admired her creativity and sensitivity. But after a promotion to a senior position, Oliver had become more critical, his warmth replaced by a cold, businesslike demeanor. Emily noticed how he seemed to look at her differently, his gaze more scrutinizing than loving. He commented on her appearance, her lack of a career, her small-minded focus on the home. These remarks were often accompanied by an air of superiority that was new to him and painful to her. Every time he spoke in that tone, Emily felt a little piece of herself wither away. She tried to adapt, to show interest in his work and keep up with his new social circle, hoping to meet the standard he seemed to want from her. But no matter how much she tried, it felt like nothing could make Oliver happy anymore. She began to question herself, wondering if she had somehow failed him without realizing it. The moment of reckoning came one evening when Oliver invited his colleagues over for a formal dinner. Emily, despite feeling insecure, put all her energy into preparing a beautiful meal. She wanted so desperately to prove herself, to show that she could be the perfect partner he wanted in front of his friends. As they gathered around the table, Emily served each dish with care, her hands trembling slightly under their gaze. She caught Oliver looking at her, but instead of the smile she was hoping for, there was a hint of disdain. Throughout the evening, he laughed with his colleagues but ignored her, often talking over her or cutting her off when she tried to join the conversation. The humiliation stung deeply, yet Emily forced herself to smile, determined to hold it together. When one of his colleagues joked about how Emily must have plenty of free time, Oliver laughed and replied, "Yes, she certainly does." The comment was offhand, but it felt like a slap to Emily. In front of people she barely knew, he had reduced her to someone insignificant, someone whose value was merely decorative. That night, as she lay in bed beside him, she realized that the man she loved was slowly breaking her spirit. Emily knew she needed to talk to someone, but she felt too ashamed to admit the depth of her despair. She met her best friend Sarah for coffee the next morning, her face carefully composed, hiding the pain beneath. But Sarah, who had known her for years, noticed something was wrong. "Emily, are you okay?" she asked gently, reaching across the table to touch her hand. At first, Emily tried to brush it off, but as Sarah's concerned gaze held her, she couldn't hold back any longer. She confided in Sarah about the dinner, the hurtful comments, and the increasing distance between her and Oliver. "He doesn't see me anymore, Sarah," she said, her voice breaking. "I feel invisible, like I'm not even a part of his life." Sarah listened quietly, offering support and comfort, but her words only served as a temporary balm. The reality was that Emily had to confront Oliver and the truth of their marriage, no matter how much it hurt. Desperate for guidance, Emily decided to seek counseling. Sitting across from a compassionate therapist, she shared the details of her marriage, her sacrifices, and her husband's growing cruelty. The therapist listened, and after a long silence, gently suggested, "Emily, you need to take care of yourself. His actions do not define you, but your happiness depends on what you choose from here." These words stayed with Emily, resonating in a way that stirred something deep within her. She realized she had spent so long focusing on Oliver's needs, his dreams, that she had forgotten her own. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she came first, a life where she felt valued. Emily decided to reconnect with her love for painting, an old hobby she had abandoned shortly after marriage. She found a small studio to rent and spent hours there, lost in the colors and textures of the canvas. In this quiet space, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years, a place where she could escape the judgment and disappointment that now haunted her home. As she painted, memories of happier times filled her mind, and slowly, she began to feel her confidence returning. Each brushstroke was an act of healing, a step toward reclaiming the person she used to be before Oliver's words had chipped away at her spirit. Her heart, once so heavy with grief, started to feel lighter. Meanwhile, Oliver barely noticed Emily's new pursuits. If anything, he seemed relieved to see her out of the house more often, dismissing her interest in art as a harmless distraction. He went about his day with the same detached air, assuming that Emily would always be there, waiting for him, ready to support him unconditionally. But Emily was changing, and with every moment she spent away from Oliver, she felt a little stronger, a little more distant from the pain he had caused her. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, torn between her love for a man who no longer valued her and her growing need for independence. One morning, as Emily prepared breakfast, Oliver commented on her appearance again, noting how unmotivated she seemed. He suggested she should try harder to look presentable, as though she were a reflection of his own success. Emily clenched her jaw, her hands trembling as she realized she could no longer ignore the contempt in his words. For the first time, she responded with quiet defiance, saying, "I am more than a reflection of you, Oliver." He looked at her, surprised and irritated, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. It was a small act of resistance, but it marked a turning point for Emily, a realization that she deserved respect. Emily knew she needed to make a change, but she wasn't sure how to begin. After a sleepless night filled with painful memories, she decided to write a letter to Oliver. She poured out her feelings, expressing the hurt she had carried in silence for so long. She wrote about the person she used to be, and the person she wanted to become. Her words were raw, honest, a plea for him to understand the impact of his cruelty. Leaving the letter on his desk, Emily felt a sense of liberation, knowing that she had finally spoken her truth. She packed a small bag and left the house before dawn, determined to give herself the space and time she needed to heal, hoping that her absence would make Oliver realize what he was losing. When Oliver found the letter, he read it with growing frustration, unable to understand why Emily had overreacted. He had always assumed that she would accept his behavior, that she would never leave. But as he read her words, he felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, regret. Though he dismissed her departure as a phase, her words lingered in his mind. He knew he had been harsh, but it was only now, as he stood in their empty home, that he began to feel the weight of what he had lost. Days turned into weeks, and Oliver found himself alone in the large, quiet house. Without Emily's gentle presence, the emptiness felt oppressive. He tried to go about his routine, convincing himself that she'd return. But with each passing day, he found her absence harder to bear. For the first time, he noticed the little things she used to do, preparing his favorite coffee in the morning, leaving fresh flowers on the dining table, and the way she always had something warm to say as he walked out the door. In the silence, Oliver was forced to face the painful reality. He had driven away the woman who had once been his greatest joy. Her letter sat on his desk, and though he'd read it several times, he felt like he was seeing it with new eyes each time. Her words haunted him, and he began to realize the depth of the wounds he'd inflicted on her. The memories of his hurtful words replayed in his mind, each one sharper and more painful than the last. As he sat alone in the quiet of their once warm home, Oliver felt a pang of remorse deep in his chest. The world he had built, filled with success and status, felt hollow without her. He started to wonder if any of his achievements mattered at all if he'd lost the only person who had ever truly cared for him. Meanwhile, Emily had found solace in a small, peaceful town by the ocean. She stayed in a cozy bed and breakfast, taking long walks along the shore and spending her days painting in a local art studio she'd rented. The ocean waves crashing against the rocks became her soundtrack, a reminder of resilience and the constant flow of life. She felt a new sense of freedom here, far from the home she'd once shared with Oliver, where every room held painful memories. As she painted, she allowed herself to process the grief, the anger, and the regret that she'd suppressed for so long. The hurt still lingered, but here, in this place of peace, she began to rediscover herself, slowly finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. One evening, as the sun set over the water, she realized that for the first time in years, she felt whole. She didn't know what her future held, but she knew that she was ready to face it with or without Oliver. This newfound strength, like the tide, ebbed and flowed, but each day, she felt a little more in control of her life, a little more like herself. The longer Emily was away, the more Oliver's thoughts began to shift. At first, he was frustrated, dismissing her departure as impulsive. But as he read through her letter again, certain phrases struck him like blows. "You've made me feel invisible, I've become a stranger in my own home, the love we shared has become a burden." Each word was a painful reminder of how much he had taken her for granted. He began to see how his own pride, his focus on success, had driven him to ignore the simple, meaningful moments they used to share. He thought of the person he had once been, the man who loved Emily deeply, who had wanted nothing more than to make her happy. In his obsession with success, he had forgotten that man entirely. For the first time, Oliver wondered if he could ever truly change. Could he become the husband Emily deserved? The realization of what he had lost made him feel hollow, but he knew he couldn't leave things as they were. He had to find a way to make amends, no matter how difficult the journey might be. Determined to win Emily back, Oliver began to take small but meaningful steps. He enrolled in therapy, hoping to understand the root of his anger and arrogance. Each session revealed parts of himself he had buried deep down, insecurities, fears, and a need for validation that had driven his obsession with work. He started to realize that his own self-worth had become tangled up in his professional success, leaving him emotionally unavailable to those he loved most. As he confronted these truths, he began to let go of the resentment and superiority that had distanced him from Emily. He no longer wanted to be the man who belittled his wife or took her love for granted. Slowly, Oliver began to see a path forward, one that required humility and a willingness to rebuild himself from the ground up. While Oliver was seeking redemption, Emily's independence blossomed. She met new friends in the small town, people who appreciated her for who she was and encouraged her artistic pursuits. She shared her story with a local artist who became a mentor, guiding her through the emotions that she poured onto her canvas. Emily's artwork became an expression of her journey. Each painting told a piece of her story, a story of heartbreak, growth, and resilience. She could feel the weight of her past lifting, replaced by a newfound confidence and a sense of purpose. She no longer needed anyone's approval, least of all Oliver's, to feel whole. Her art and her freedom were enough, and she was finally content with who she was. One day, as Emily returned from the studio, she noticed a letter waiting for her at the front desk of her inn. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from Oliver. She hesitated, her heart pounding as she held the envelope, uncertain if she was ready to hear what he had to say. In the letter, Oliver apologized, expressing remorse in a way she had never seen before. He admitted his faults openly, acknowledging the pain he had caused and his commitment to change. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote, "but I want you to know that I am doing the work to become a better person, with or without your forgiveness." Emily felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to forgive him, but another part questioned if his transformation was genuine. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her bag, uncertain of what her next step would be. A few weeks after receiving the letter, Emily decided she was ready to meet Oliver. She reached out, suggesting they meet in a public place, somewhere neutral where they could talk without the shadows of their past looming over them. They agreed on a small cafe in town, a quiet place where they could both feel at ease. When she saw him, she barely recognized him. There was a gentleness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet humility that took her by surprise. They spoke carefully, almost like strangers meeting for the first time, each of them treading cautiously around the memories that had once bound them so tightly. Oliver told her about his therapy, the realizations he had come to, and his newfound desire to become a man worthy of respect. Emily listened, her heart softening as she saw his sincerity. For the first time, she felt that perhaps there was a chance for something new to grow between them, something built on respect, not on obligation or guilt. Over the following months, Oliver and Emily continued to meet occasionally, rebuilding their connection slowly. They chose to approach each other as friends first, rediscovering the things they appreciated in one another without the weight of past expectations. Their conversations became more genuine, each of them learning to see the other through fresh eyes. Emily felt cautious but hopeful. She appreciated this new version of Oliver, someone who seemed genuinely invested in her happiness rather than using her as a mirror for his own success. It was a tentative connection, fragile yet real, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. One evening, after a long conversation filled with laughter and shared memories, Oliver looked at Emily with a quiet determination. He told her that he wanted to rebuild their marriage, but this time on her terms. He promised to be the partner she deserved, to support her dreams and treat her with the respect she longed for. Emily didn't answer right away. She felt a surge of emotions: hope, fear, love, and a lingering hesitation. She wanted to believe in this new Oliver, but the scars of the past made her wary. She decided to take her time, knowing that this decision could shape the rest of her life. As the weeks passed, Emily continued to reflect on Oliver's proposal. She knew she loved him, and she could see he had changed. But she also knew that she had changed, too. She was no longer the same woman who had once depended on him for her sense of self-worth. She was independent, confident, and content with her life. One evening, she invited Oliver to the studio to see her art. As he admired her work, she felt a sense of pride and fulfillment that was hers alone, unconnected to anyone else's validation. In that moment, she knew her answer. She turned to him and said, "I'm willing to give us another chance, but only if we're equals, two individuals who choose each other every day, out of love, not obligation." With a new understanding and a mutual respect, Emily and Oliver decided to move forward together, taking each step with caution and gratitude. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, they felt like partners, united in their determination to build a relationship that honored both of their dreams. As they walked out of the studio together, hand in hand, they felt the weight of their past lifting. They were no longer bound by old wounds or hidden resentments. Instead, they were two people, flawed but willing to grow together, facing the future with open hearts and a renewed commitment to love. With their relationship rekindled, Emily and Oliver began to establish a new routine together, one that allowed space for both of their personal growth. They made it a point to have weekly date nights, spending time together without the distractions of work or obligations. These outings became a way for them to reconnect, each evening filled with laughter, shared memories, and honest conversations. But their time together was balanced with time apart. Emily continued to spend hours in her art studio, pouring her soul into her work, while Oliver dedicated himself to his therapy and volunteer work he'd begun at a local community center. These pursuits gave them each a renewed sense of purpose, strengthening their bond while allowing them to remain individuals. Their life together began to feel like a delicate dance, one where both were free to shine independently while supporting one another fully. Over time, Emily noticed that the little things Oliver did, like asking about her day or respecting her space, meant as much to her as any grand gesture. And for Oliver, the freedom to love Emily without expectation or control felt like a new and profound gift. Their love was growing, deeper and more genuine than it had ever been before. One afternoon, Emily was painting in her studio when she realized just how far she had come. Her art was more expressive, her strokes more daring, and she felt a sense of completeness that she hadn't known before. She smiled as she thought of Oliver, realizing that their reconciliation had allowed her to become her fullest self. She loved him, but she no longer depended on him for her happiness. When she shared this revelation with him, Oliver was moved. He admired her independence and strength, grateful that she was willing to share her life with him. "Emily," he said one evening as they walked by the shore, "I finally see you for who you are, a brilliant, compassionate, creative woman who deserves everything in the world. And I'm honored to be a part of your life, no matter how big or small that part may be." Emily squeezed his hand, touched by his words. They stood together in silence, listening to the waves, their hearts full of a quiet joy. They both knew that their love, this time, was built on respect and understanding, and it was a love that would continue to grow and evolve. To celebrate their progress, Emily suggested they visit the places that had once held meaning in their early years of marriage. They returned to the little cafe where they had shared their first date, the park where they'd spent long afternoons laughing, and even the small apartment where they'd lived when they were first married. It was a nostalgic journey, one that brought back memories of the early days when they'd been so full of hope and dreams. As they revisited these old haunts, they spoke openly about the mistakes they had made, the misunderstandings that had built up, and the times they had taken each other for granted. It was a cathartic experience, one that allowed them to let go of any lingering resentment and fully embrace the present. They both knew they couldn't change the past, but they could honor it as part of their shared story, a reminder of how far they'd come. In the midst of these familiar places, Emily and Oliver found a renewed appreciation for each other. Their love felt fresh and new, untarnished by the pain of the past. And as they held hands, they made a silent promise to cherish every moment moving forward, no longer bound by what once was, but inspired by what could be. Forgiveness had been a long journey for Emily, but as she stood with Oliver in the small, sunlit apartment they'd once called home, she felt a profound sense of release. She had forgiven him, not just for the hurt he had caused her, but also for the ways he had hurt himself in his relentless pursuit of success. She realized that holding on to her anger had only weighed her down, keeping her from the peace she deserved. As they left the apartment and walked down the familiar street, Oliver turned to her and said, "Thank you, Emily. Thank you for forgiving me and for giving me another chance." She smiled, a warmth spreading through her as she saw the sincerity in his eyes. She knew he had changed, and she felt grateful that they had both been willing to work toward this healing. Forgiveness had not erased the past, but it had transformed it into something meaningful, a testament to their resilience and love. Emily knew that her forgiveness was not a gift for Oliver alone, it was a gift to herself, a way to let go and move forward without regret. With the foundation of their relationship now firmly rooted in trust and respect, Emily and Oliver began to find ways to support each other's passions. Oliver encouraged Emily's art, attending her gallery shows and sharing her work with his friends. He spoke with pride about her talent, no longer seeing it as a mere hobby but as a core part of who she was. Emily, in turn, supported Oliver's involvement with the community center, where he had taken on a mentorship role with young adults. She admired his commitment to helping others and saw how much joy it brought him. Watching him in this new role, she realized he was becoming a better version of himself, someone who had learned from his mistakes and wanted to make a positive difference. Their support for one another became a vital part of their relationship. They were no longer competing or seeking approval but simply standing by each other, proud of the people they had become. Their partnership felt strong, a solid foundation on which they could continue to build a life of shared dreams and personal fulfillment. Emily and Oliver began to discuss their future together, something they had once avoided out of fear and uncertainty. They spoke about the dreams they wanted to pursue, traveling to new places, creating a home filled with art and love, and perhaps one day, opening a community gallery where Emily could display her work and where Oliver could continue his mentoring. These dreams felt attainable now, not because of their financial success but because of the strong emotional bond they had built. They both understood that their dreams would only be as fulfilling as the love and respect they shared. They looked forward to a life that was rich not in wealth, but in moments of joy, connection, and purpose. For the first time in years, their future felt bright and full of possibility. They were no longer bound by fear or resentment, but by a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger and purer than before. Through Oliver's work at the community center and Emily's art exhibitions, they began to form a network of friends who supported their journey. These friends became like family, people who encouraged them to continue growing and learning. Emily found herself surrounded by creative spirits, fellow artists who inspired her to push her art to new heights, while Oliver found a sense of purpose in guiding young adults toward positive paths. Their friends celebrated their love and growth, and for the first time, Emily and Oliver felt a sense of belonging in a community that valued them not for what they had, but for who they were. These friendships added a new dimension to their lives, enriching their relationship and filling their days with warmth and laughter. Together with their friends, they created a community built on mutual respect and shared values. It was a family they had chosen, one that reminded them of the beauty of connection and the strength that comes from being surrounded by people who truly care. As the anniversary of their reconciliation approached, Oliver suggested they renew their vows in a small, private ceremony. He wanted to honor the journey they had taken and make a new promise, a promise to cherish and respect Emily for the rest of their lives. Emily, deeply moved, agreed, and together they planned a simple, heartfelt ceremony by the ocean where they had found so much healing. Standing together with only close friends as witnesses, they exchanged new vows, words that reflected the growth and transformation they had experienced. This time, there were no grand gestures or extravagant displays. Their promises were simple, honest, and filled with love. As they looked into each other's eyes, they felt a sense of peace and certainty, knowing that this was the start of a new chapter in their lives. Their friends clapped, tears of joy in their eyes as they watched Emily and Oliver embrace, their love rekindled, stronger and deeper than it had ever been before. In that moment, they knew they had been given a second chance, and they intended to honor it fully. Emily and Oliver's life together continued to grow in beauty and depth. They spent their days creating, supporting, and celebrating each other, never forgetting the struggles that had brought them to this point. Their home became a sanctuary, filled with Emily's artwork and mementos from their travels, each piece a reminder of their shared journey and the love that had been reborn. Their lives, once defined by resentment and pain, were now filled with laughter, friendship, and purpose. They knew that challenges would come, but they felt ready to face them together, their bond fortified by forgiveness and mutual respect. And so, Emily and Oliver lived a life that was rich in love, a testament to the strength of the human heart and the beauty that arises when two people choose to honor each other, even after the darkest of days. They had found happiness not in perfection, but in acceptance, in the joy of each other's company, and in the quiet assurance that they had finally come home.